All right, so the Joe Biden administration just announced that he is on the verge of making yet another absolutely catastrophic foreign policy decision, this time by refusing to release upwards of $7 billion that belongs to the people of Afghanistan. So I want to get into the details of exactly what Joe Biden is doing here, but understand the current situation in Afghanistan is up there with Yemen in being the single worst humanitarian crisis on the entire planet right now, okay? We are talking about more people who are at risk of dying in the immediate future, largely because of these sanctions and because of this money that we are withholding from Afghanistan. We're talking about more people potentially dying in the immediate future than died over the entirety of the 20 years of warfare that we were waging in this country. So it's a pretty horrific situation that Biden is choosing to basically double down and make even worse. So here's some of the details from the New York Times. They say, President Biden is starting to clear a legal path for relatives of victims of the September 11, 2001 attacks to pursue $3.5 billion that Afghanistan's central bank had deposited in New York before the Taliban takeover, while also seeking to steer a roughly equal amount towards spending to aid the Afghan people. So in other words, he's stealing $3.5 billion, half of this amount, to give to the families of victims of 9/11. Okay, let's just continue reading here. So he says, beginning that process, Mr. Biden issued an executive order on Friday morning invoking emergency powers to consolidate and freeze all $7 billion of the total assets the Afghan central bank kept in New York, and the administration said it would ask a judge for permission to move $3.5 billion to a trust fund that it would set up to support the needs of the Afghan people, like for humanitarian relief. Okay, so this is pretty vague, right? Obviously, we don't know how this money would actually be deployed or who it would be going to or what material effect it would actually have on the situation on the ground, but according to all of the experts, like we're about to get into here, even that $3.5 billion or even the $7 billion wouldn't even necessarily be enough. If anything, in my opinion, we owe reparations to the people of Afghanistan for spending 2 decades completely destroying and obliterating that country, okay? So, we're literally stealing money from them, essentially, at least $3.5 billion, but arguably, we're stealing the entire $7 billion to go to what? Compensate victims of 9/11? I mean, again, what did the people of Afghanistan, these innocent civilians whose lives are on the table right now, what did they have to do with 9/11? I mean, like, literally absolutely nothing, and yet they're being punished for this, they're being looted, they're being stolen from for what? The victims of 9/11? I mean, if you want to fund some program to go help, the victims or the families of the victims of 9/11, we can do that. I mean, we are the single wealthiest nation in the history of the planet. I think that we could afford to take care of those families without stealing and looting from the Afghan people. I mean, it's just a completely psychotic situation. And if you think I'm exaggerating about the humanitarian situation on the ground, I got a good breakdown here from The Intercept's Austin Aumann, who basically puts it in full perspective, because this is, as he says, tantamount to mass murder. Okay, it is going to have absolutely catastrophic consequences. So here's what he had to say. He says, for months, the administration has been debating how the future of economic relations with the Taliban-controlled Afghanistan will look, and the assets which were initially frozen when the Taliban seized control of the country in August are essential for the liquidity and basic functionality of the economy. And with the administration's decision to return none of them to the central bank, which American economists who helped design and still help to run say is still independent from the Taliban. So in case you're going to freak out and say, well, we don't want to just hand money over to the Taliban to do whatever the fuck they want with it. Well, according to the people who literally set up this entire project in the first place, it wouldn't even be going to the Taliban directly. It would be going to the Central Bank of Afghanistan, which is somewhat independent of the Taliban's operations. But they say the Afghan people will be reliant on humanitarian aid for the foreseeable future. And already reports say that aid is not enough to prevent the precipitous decline in living conditions the Afghan people are facing. So again, this is important because this is money that wouldn't just be going to aid, as Joe Biden is planning here, with half of that money, $3.5 billion, going to maybe some humanitarian groups on the ground. That isn't enough. The whole point of the $7 billion being returned to the central bank is because it can act as liquidity for the basic functionality of their economy. Okay, so it's important beyond just delivering immediate aid to people. Okay, this is about creating some sort of an actual sustainable economy or economic future for the people of Afghanistan. So he continues here saying, the problem is one of basic economics. Seizing the central bank funds has brought economic activity to a standstill, and people have lost access to money that was held in banks, and government workers and teachers are still going without paychecks. Importers have no access to capital to front the imports. Exporters similarly can't access capital to keep their businesses operating. And the currency, the Afghani, has collapsed in value, and inflation is much steeper in Afghanistan than the rest of the world as a result. And as you know, in terms of what the actual consequences of all of this would be, not that surprising given that we're basically shutting down the entirety of their economic functioning. But they say multiple international organizations have warned that these conditions have pushed nearly 10 million Afghans to the brink of starvation. And to survive, people are currently burning their furniture and other possessions to stay warm, selling them for food. And while those 20 years of war, as an irregularly long drought and an especially severe winter have set the stage for the crisis, the proximate cause of the Afghan people's suffering is the seizure of these assets, coupled with the sanctions that are being imposed by the U.S. government. And just to give you a perspective, okay, that's the humanitarian consequence that we are talking about being on the table. So now, what is our Congress doing about this? Are even progressives doing anything substantial to push back against this? Well, let's check in with the leader of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. So they say last week, Jayapal, the leader of the CPC, sponsored an amendment to the America Competes Act on the sanctions. And while it did not call for an end to the U.S. sanctions regime, okay, didn't even call for an end to the sanctions, it would have set up the groundwork for Congress to formally study the disastrous effects of our economic policies. Okay, so understand this was not sanctions relief being put forward by Jayapal. This wasn't even, calling for a complete release of the $7 billion that belongs to the Afghan people. This is just trying to set up a commission to study the effects of what we are doing right now. Okay, and even that couldn't get through. Okay, they say while House Democrats could have muscled the amendment through with their own votes, 44 of them joined every House Republican to block its passage, and The Intercept contacted each of those 44 Democrats, and not one of them would provide an on-record explanation for why they opposed studying the devastation Afghans are facing as a result of U.S. policies. So understand, okay? We invade this country, occupy this country that did not attack us, that marginally, you can argue the Taliban played some role in protecting members of Al-Qaeda, etc. But they as a country, them as a people, the innocent civilians that are going to be facing the brunt of the consequences because of these actions from the Biden administration, they had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11 or us being attacked, okay? So we invade and occupy this country, spend 2 decades completely destroying their infrastructure, destroying countless civilian lives, etc. And then at the end of the day, not only do we not help to rebuild this country, not only did we, set up a completely corrupt and dysfunctional government that collapsed the instant that we left, not only did we create a situation in which the Afghan people were almost entirely reliant on foreign aid and foreign support, not only did we do all of that and set up the conditions for the humanitarian crisis that they are currently facing, but then after we leave, we are going to rob them. We are going to take their fucking money, billions of it, and give it to the families of victims of something that these people in Afghanistan had absolutely nothing to do with, okay? And we can't even get a study to determine the consequences of that. We can't even not only reverse the sanctions, not only can we not, give this $7 billion to the central bank so that they can start this economic, production again, but we can't even get a fucking study to determine what the actual effects are going to be. Just absolute ghoul shit here from both Republicans and Democrats on this front. But they give a little bit of perspective in terms of what people are willing to say sort of off the record. They say a senior Democratic foreign policy aide who was granted anonymity to openly share his thoughts on the Biden administration's actions, said the policy, quote, effectively amounts to mass murder. And according to the aide, Biden has had warnings from the UN Secretary General, the International Rescue Committee, and the Red Cross, with a unanimous consensus that the liquidity of the central bank is of paramount of importance, and no amount of aid can compensate for the destruction of the Afghans' financial system and the whole macro economy. So this is what people are willing to say behind the scenes. I get why you would want to protect yourself a little bit here, but can we get some people to actually go out on the record and say, hey, sacrificing potentially millions of innocent Afghan civilians is a bad thing? I mean, can we really not get people to come out on the record and say that that's a bad fucking thing? This is insane that we live in a country where people are having to go, anonymously give these types of takes. Okay, this should be the baseline fundamental recognition of human rights around the world. Okay, it's absolutely psychotic that we have to, rely on these behind the scenes, whistleblowers basically to come out and give these types of takes that are just, stating what the reality is, and not just the reality based on his own personal opinions. But again, this is what all of these international organizations are saying is going to happen. Okay, and basically the entirety of the Democratic and Republican Party seem to be in complete denial of this reality. But They continue here with another take of Mark Weisbrot, the co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, who agreed with the characterizations of Biden's decision as mass starvation, saying that most people don't understand the economics of Biden's devastating decision, he told The Intercept. And he says, if a country doesn't have reserves and it doesn't have a functioning central bank, then there's no amount of aid that's going to come anywhere close to making up for that. So again, you can't just splinter this off and say, oh, well, he's still giving, $3.5 billion in aid to them, to these humanitarian groups, and pretend like that's going to come close to solving the problem. It's not. You can't do that and have that be a sustainable solution if they don't even have a functioning economy in the first place. Okay, so just completely delusional. Now, we do have some people who are coming out on the record and saying that, starving millions of people is a bad thing. Number one, Bernie Sanders here, saying Afghanistan is facing a humanitarian catastrophe. I urge the Biden administration to immediately release billions in frozen Afghan government funds to help avert the crisis and prevent the deaths of millions of people. But we also have Democrats who have come out on the opposite side of that. So they say other senators have mostly dismissed questions about America's complicity in a potential Afghan genocide. And in interviews with The Intercept over the last week, several typically outspoken liberal senators have demurred or rejected the premise of questions about our sanctions regime. One was Tammy Duckworth, a veteran of America's war in Iraq, who denied hearing about the many reports indicating that humanitarian assistance alone will prove insufficient in aiding Afghans. And Senator Tammy Baldwin pointed to the Taliban's prior refusal to allow women and girls to attend school and work to justify Biden's policies, but said she would further study reports confirming that, since assuming power in August, the Taliban has continued to allow women to maintain a role in public life. So again, basically the same liberals who, as we were pulling out of Afghanistan, had their hair on fire and were screaming about, what about the innocent civilians in Afghanistan and the consequences that the Taliban will impose on them. Those are all, somewhat fair questions if you're asking them in a genuine way, because the Taliban is brutal and they are repressive. Not exactly the best people on the planet, okay? But the point is, you had all of these people who were screeching about this, who are now turning around after we've left and after Biden is implementing policies that will kill more people than the war itself and more people than the Taliban could in a million lifetimes. Then suddenly they're silent about the humanitarian consequences that will inevitably come for innocent women and children. Okay, so again, just a complete hypocrisy here. But we also had absolute demons like Senator Rand Paul, who were more overt about their absolute hatred of innocent people in Afghanistan, saying, they say Senator Rand Paul, a steadfast opponent of sanctions, who gave a fiery speech opposing Senator Ted Cruz's proposal to sanction Russia just a few weeks ago, equivocated the plight of the Afghan people, telling The Intercept that the Biden administration's withdrawal prompted the crisis and that he does not support easing sanctions or releasing frozen assets this time. And vocal progressive Senator Mazie Hirono from Hawaii responded to a question about the devastation wrought by sanctions and frozen assets with a question of her own, saying, "We're still talking about Afghanistan?" I mean, do you see how little they value human life when it doesn't apply here in the United States? Or really, I mean, arguably guys like Rand Paul and other Republicans don't even give a shit about American life at all. But I mean, this is just dehumanizing. This is insanity. We're talking about potentially tens of millions, if not at least millions of people whose lives are directly at stake because of these aggressive policies that Biden is taking. And they're literally saying, we're still talking about Afghanistan, as if these people's lives just don't even matter at all. They don't deserve any recognition of the brutality of the reality of the sanctions and the frozen assets that Biden is choosing to deploy right now. So again, just absolute demons, absolute ghouls who are giving their takes on this. And it seems like barely anybody. I've seen a couple. I've seen, Ilhan Omar came out. Bernie Sanders obviously came out condemning this move. But the overwhelming majority of both parties in this circumstance are basically saying that genocide is okay, starving millions of people is okay, and that's just the reality of what we have right now. So Mehdi Hassan, I think, had a good take basically summing this all up. He said, I cannot describe for you in words how outrageous this is. Afghans are starving. This is all their money. Okay, importantly, none of this is our money. This is about giving them back the money that is owed to them. And there was not a single Afghan aboard any of those 4 planes on 9/11. There were 15 Saudis plus Egyptian, Emirati, and Lebanese nationals. Get the money from those countries if you must. So again, at the end of the day, he's what Biden is doing here is basically weaponizing what people would typically say is a good thing, right? Giving support to victims victims or families of the victims of 9/11, that in and of itself is obviously a good thing, okay? But the point is, we can afford to take care of those people and those families with our own money, or I don't know, maybe some of the hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars that we give in aid to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Israel, any other, number of these countries that are massive human rights violators that don't deserve large portions of the military equipment and logistical support and intelligence support that we are giving them. I don't know, maybe you could find anywhere else to get this money other than the supply of billions of dollars that would potentially prevent millions of people from dying in Afghanistan right now. So just again, an absolutely, catastrophic foreign policy mistake that Biden is choosing to make here. Let's not, dance around it. This is Biden choosing to enact a policy of mass starvation and mass suffering, potentially killing upwards of a couple million Afghans for basically what? I mean, at the end of the day, basically to try to look tough in front of the Republican Party and not look like he is, I don't know, appeasing the Taliban, I guess.